I'm so glad that we're getting to like come together because I really enjoyed talking with all of you, and you all have such brilliant and interesting perspectives. I'm glad those are able to come together. So how has mass incarceration impacted that community or even communities within the area that that you belong to?
So like a lot of what they call the Rust Belt, they had these booming histories, these times earlier in the last century where Black people came up from the South to come to this place where it was so easy to get a job. And compared to what they had been receiving as wages, really good paying jobs.
When I was a kid, Decatur was an industrial town, factories everywhere. I mean, I've had friends that worked at 4 major factories in 1 month. So everybody had a house, a yard, and a dog, and a car. You know, we were pretty prosperous back then with the industry. But during the 70s, the industry started to fold. Plant closings, strikes, they would leave, corporate taxes, things of that nature. And that left a big void. Well, with the good jobs leaving, what I want to say is people aren't making a living wage now because those type of jobs are gone now. And unfortunately, we didn't prepare ourselves for this shortfall.
Part of the surrounding economy is a number of prisons, which are major employers and very powerful kind of economic influences, over the course of the neoliberal era where the prison industry expanded so much. Factories closed down and prisons moved in.
My father was a correctional officer, and unfortunately in an area that's rural, they build prisons to employ people. My dad was a minority working as a correctional officer for the Department of Corrections for youth at a youth center. So it was unique because I heard stories and I could see the stress in his eyes and different things that he had to experience. And sometimes he would take it out on us in unhealthy ways.
And I went through the 80s being incarcerated through that decade. And what I found interesting is that the men that were in there were a lot older, and they had came out of a period of 1960 where the country was very politically active. So a lot of those individuals that was in prison were like read 1,000 books, and they had articulated, they used the terminology I don't even begin to understand. And so I came in a period where these old men were educating me. The educational system within the penal system, even while I was there, was being chipped away. Where's that now? It makes you want to cry.
The government instituted Get Tough on Crime. That's when mass incarceration really took off. In 1972, there were 300,000 of us in prisons. In 2017, I believe there's over 2 million folks in prison. $6 billion was spent in jails and prisons in 1980, up to $80 billion in 2017. Huge profits for private business. The more people incarcerated, the more profit. It's racism and economics all balled up into one.
I think we have to recognize that mass incarceration is not about crime. It's about the political choices that the United States has made to solve social problems. So what the choices that the United States government has made, and local and state governments have made the similar choice, is that they solve problems by punishing people.
Mass incarceration impacted my life because I was incarcerated when I was 23 years old, and that was around the time that Bill Clinton, the tough on crime bills, and all those different things were happening. You know, the statistics speak for themselves. Even here in Champaign or in the state of Illinois, 13% African American, but you look at the prison population, it fluctuates between 40 and 50%.
I have visited correctional centers. I have done jail ministry, but what do I see the population? The population is, there are African Americans. What if you trace back in our history, it always has been more African Americans than the others.
What we've seen in Bloomington is this national trend of over-policing of Black and brown and poor neighborhoods and over-representation of those populations in the criminal justice system and in pretrial incarceration.
Where I grew up, yes, it's very normal for them to arrest you, to incarcerate you, to come in a house without a search warrant, to pull you over just while DWB, and those were things that we all got used to. Those were societal norms. I went to prison for driving on revoked, and I had my baby cuffed to a bed with a man in the room that said, if you've seen one, you've seen them all. I'm not leaving. And this was 16 years ago. That's why I've worked so hard to change this law for other women, because you should never have to go through that.
My son and my husband are constantly stopped by the police in Carbondale. For literally, my son for walking down the street, he will get stopped and carded. We need to see your ID. For what? I'm walking down the street, dude. My husband gets stopped all the time on his bike for riding his bike, and he has a book bag, so they search his book bag. What are you looking for? We all see this happening constantly. Their system isn't broken. It's doing exactly what they want it to do. And if we all don't come together and make it stop, it's just not gonna happen.
You know, as an undocumented person, like grew up very fearful of, state-sanctioned violence, understanding that any encounter that I would have with the police could be potentially disastrous, not just for myself, but for my entire family. My first month as an organizer, we are having getting phone calls from people whose moms and dads and brothers and sisters never came home from work because we had a pretty constant ICE presence as their teams were traveling between St. Louis and Chicago. Bloomington was one of the sort of stops along the way, and so we'd have people picked up all over. So that was as a 20-year-old brand spanking new organizer, this was my first experience, was folks being taken.
We're working in a state penitentiary with women from all over the state, but we're still, the majority is Black, and that's a problem. White people don't have to engage with perspectives other than their own because all of the systems were built for them. So when they see other people struggling with the system, they assume that it's the person's fault rather than the system's fault.
Not only do we think about the rising rates of women filling up jails and prisons and detention facilities around the country, but also how the incarceration of men impacts women and families, and how questions of gender and sexuality are criminalized. So the vulnerability of trans people, of gender non-binary people. So in thinking about the sort of intersection of a feminist gender violence and the questions of mass criminalization, mass incarceration, it's not only the populations who are inside, but the impact of this process of the buildup of a prison nation is impacting women and families and children and gender non-binary people on the outside, sort of both at the same time.
I feel like what mass incarceration did was target a lot of people, take a lot of people out of the communities, a lot of men, especially of color. Men that could have been, role models, could have changed their lives, I feel like that directly impacts, especially a young person's life, growing up, in the household, that dynamic, the mother, the children. And it's it definitely affects, my life, I would say.
Incarceration literally has the power to corrupt prisoners mentally, and that corruption follows and challenges individuals after being released from prison. And it prevents them from living a normal and a steady life.
We do not give a place as a society, and in places like East St. Louis, we don't make a space for felons. We disenfranchise them. We take away their votes. We have employers that say, we don't want you to work here. And so I see mass incarceration as a sign that we are doing something wrong in our society. And what hurts me is that so many people think it's a sign of doing something right.
Locking somebody up and asking them to think about their decisions without providing them any means to rehabilitate or to recover from the trauma that led them to whatever crime they committed is just setting people up for failure.
Right.
It's re-traumatizing. Prison is a traumatic experience, and it is often not the first traumatic experience that an individual who is incarcerated has experienced.
Immediately when crimes are committed, with mental health or even with drug-related crimes, they automatically are convicted without thinking about like treatment or without thinking about other alternatives for behavioral health issues or challenges that people are facing.
So kind of thinking about possible ways of fixing this. If the end goal is a truly just society, what would that look like to you? And also, how do we get there?
In order for our current society to stay the way it is, there has to be haves and there has to be have-nots, right? And whenever there are all these have-nots, we have to have a way to deal with it. And our current institutions are set up in a way to keep this going, right? So even if we kind of, like this whole slow progress thing, even if we slightly tweak one thing over here, the system is really just, it's set up to adapt and keep the same things going on. So a lot of these institutions would have to be just completely dismantled and brought back up in a different way.
You know, unless you find the root of the problem, you can't eradicate it. You got to go at the basic. What's going on in people's homes? How are they teaching their kids anymore? Your mind is an important thing. What you have in your mind, that's what you become.
Everything that's happening right now has to happen. We have to have these marches. We have to have all this action that's taking place. We have to have these conversations in order for us to get anywhere.
I think financial reparations for us as Black people, compensation for brown people as well, and whatever that looks like, and the equitability. So whatever, it doesn't have to necessarily be from specific money and dollars. It could be better access to quality education, better neighborhoods, reducing even more subliminal redlining, as I was talking about earlier. So many different things we can do to increase the community and being action oriented and not just someone who is white just using their privilege because it's trendy, but really effectively using their privilege to make things equitable.
Well, I know that we've been focused on 3 areas: a physical infrastructure, civil infrastructure, and then a spiritual infrastructure. So that means city government, including the Board of Education, community organizations, and the church, because we need a spiritual direction. So that's justice in the courtroom, access to the classroom, and support in the community.
I think for me, a really important piece is a philosophical change, a different frame of mind, a different paradigm of how we see community, who's part of the community, who has rights in the community, and who has rights to power in the community.
I think we need to understand that as we are working toward a just society, we need to both meet the crises that people are facing and respond to the emergencies in people's lives through things like mutual aid and access to services. And we need to be building the visionary society where people are free. And I say that to start because I think sometimes we're either so focused on building the freedom society or meeting individual needs that we don't remember that we have to do both at the same time.
It's not magic. If the political elites know that you are going to hold them accountable at the polls, they're going to listen to you. People need to actually participate in this process. As hard as we work and as much as we push, the resistance we face, I see it in some of the folks that Black Lives Matter reaches out to. They're tired. And I'm not even going to bother anymore. I'm just going to, this is the way it is. There's nothing I can do about it. The biggest step we can take is to give people hope that this work we're doing is not in vain, and that with their help, we can actually achieve real progress.
We're going to not stand by and be silent anymore. We're going to speak and continue to speak and continue to fight, and something is going to have to give. I mean, hey, at least maybe if not my lifetime, maybe for my kids, but something most definitely will give, because I'm not going to stop until it does.